in the first service, I wasn't prepared for that and didn't really want to preach after. Music has the ability to reach inside of people's soul and just grip your heart. And if the singer does it right, they take you on a journey and you enter into their story. And as you enter into that story, a lot of times when you hear a song like this that has pain, has loss, has hurt, it brings you to a place where you remember, you hold on to your pain, your struggle. As soon as she started singing in the first service, I just was like, oh my word, I don't want to go up. Dear Jesus, come back in about 3 minutes. And then I watched half of you reach for your tissues. And through pain and suffering, it also gives us something back to look at where we just kind of hold on to it. We hold on to positively or negatively. You can hold on to it from the angle of this is a place that I'm stuck in, or you can hold on to it from a place of this is where people gathered around me in my sorrow, in my pain, and went through life with me. But it invokes memories of struggle, of a place where you don't really want to be. And I don't know if you've ever had one of those days where you come home and that day was just one of those tough days that was filled with sadness, with pain, with hurt, with loneliness. And all day, all you can think about is, I just want to crawl back in bed and be done with this day. And I think if you process and you think about it, you have these moments or these times in your life that are filled with that. And that day sometimes becomes a week, and that week becomes a month, that month becomes a year, and then before you know it, you're in a season of doubt, you're in a season of struggle, you're in a season of hurt and pain. And it's how you live through that. The statement, there's always hope. Music to me evokes hope. It's that journey down in your soul that moves you and brings you to a place where the only thing that you really can hold on to is hope. Hope of getting through it, hoping to make it to the next portion of your journey, hope that the new day will be better than the current day. And I think about those seasons, and I think about those moments and those times in my life where I struggled. One of the most difficult days for me was years ago. I had just started working with students, and I've shared this story with some people. And I just returned from a trip. I'd been gone a couple weeks. I walked in the door. And right after I got there, I received a phone call. And the person on the other line just simply said, I don't know if you've heard, but Jeremy just died. So Jeremy was one of our students. He was a senior. And if you want to take a picture of Jesus and put it in somebody's life, it was Jeremy. This 18-year-old kid represented everything that was good in this world. He was just an unbelievable person. And they said the students had gone to the lake after church and they were swimming. And his sister was standing on the edge of the lake watching them, and as Jeremy was swimming back across, he just ran out of gas. His friends tried to help him, and then they started going under. And they said he came up, he looked at everyone, and he gave them a look that just simply said, it's okay. And Jeremy went under. And they watched him die. And I remember getting that phone call, and they said, Paul, we're going over to their house, and we're just going to sit with them. We're just going to be with them. We're just calling everyone that's close to the family, and we're just asking that you come and just be. We don't know how long it'll be, but we're just going to sit with them for a season. And I remember being in a place in my life where I knew that God was real, and I had trusted him with all of my life, but I'd never really dealt with true loss, true deep hurt and sadness. And I remember on the phone sitting there and I said, okay, I'll do what I can. And I hung up the phone and I stayed at home. I never went. And for weeks, I struggled with the fact that I stayed. I didn't call them. I never went there for them. When I saw them at church weeks later, I was uncomfortable. I was just gripped with fear. You know, as they lived through this season of pain, of anger, of suffering, and as I sat there and looked at suffering in its face from a distance, I failed. I failed them. And too often, we get to these places in our life where tough things happen, where sadness enters, where loss grips our soul, when failures compound on failures, when addictions take over, and it's easy to stand over here and pretend as if that's not happening. The thing about the book of Job, as we read through it, we're going to be in chapter 3 in a second, but as if you think through Job, even what he went through, you learn from his friends and the things that they did well and the areas where they failed him. But if you even process through what he went through, it says in chapters 1 and 2 that he lost all his sheep, all his cows, his house was destroyed, his land was taken, his health was taken from him, all his children, his sons and his daughters died. It said that Job got to a point where he went outside of town and just sat there, covered in boils, and just wept. To the point where his wife even approaches him and says, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" There's a loving spouse for you. It's what you look for. It says in scriptures that he looked at her and he said, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" You see, in our world, our concept of faith too often revolves around the good, the beauty, the hope. But what do you do when pain becomes too much to bear? What do you do when the struggle is just weighing you down? How do you deal in those moments? It's not if it will come, it's when it will come. In your handout, it says the key idea there. The first phrase simply says, "With friends like these, who needs enemies?" And as we'll look through Job and his friends and how they dealt with his sorrow, there's so much you can learn, like I said, from the good and the bad. Because sometimes those that are closest to you are the ones that are either most absent or bring the most pain. I did nothing with Jeremy's family. About 6 years ago, I was up in Oregon. I called him up and I said, "Hey, could we meet?" And I just said, "I just want to apologize. I wasn't there. I didn't know what to say. The loss of Jeremy ruined me. And I think about him all the time." Even last night, as I was looking through these notes again, a post from the dad came up, and I just hadn't seen anything for years. And it hurts. How do you live with that? How do you deal with those things? Key idea goes on to say that God did not design us to go through life alone, especially the tough days. Our friends are part of God's hope for us, and we are not meant to sit alone. If you pick up the story with Job, he's lost everything. And at the end of chapter 2, he's sitting in a trash heap outside of town, just with nothing. And the question then is, how did he even get to this point? You know, I've been asked numerous times this week of why would God even cause this to happen? Or my response instantly is God did not cause this to happen. God allowed this to happen. You see, if you look back in the world that they lived in, as they're standing face to face with suffering, you see in chapters 1, you see how God talks to Satan and he asks him, "Where have you been?" And he says, "I've been hovering, I've been roaming around the earth." See, Satan was referred to in the ancient times as the active, industrious one, the destroyer. The active, industrious one. The one that is searching and seeking out and picking out these moments to destroy and ruin. And then you ask the question, well, why did God even suggest Job? You know, if you think about who he was as a person, it says that he was the most upright and righteous man. He was known all around the known world. Job was this person that if you wanted to go and see who God was, you would go and you would be with Job. Because everything about him represented the goodness of God. And then everything falls apart. You see, I think Job, for me, as I was looking at why he chose Job, I believe that he chose Job because Job had been preparing his whole life to live in unity with God, to pursue him with everything that he had so that when these moments happened, he would be prepared. Now, you can't fully ever really be prepared for situations like this. You're never prepared for death. Even if you knew years in advance, when that moment comes, it's still just this punch in the gut that causes you to just stop and everything in you just to try and breathe. And to take these steps forward where you're continuing to try to understand, and maybe you never will. And Job is sitting here crying out. It says that his 3 friends came to them and sat with him and listened to him. And after they did that, it says that Job spoke. They sat for 7 days and 7 nights. And then Job begins to speak out of this deep anguish and this deep sorrow. He begins to speak words. And the first thing that he says, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. In verse 8, it says, "May those who are good at cursing curse the day I was born." I think we all have these friends. I have a few friends that if I'm in that moment and I need somebody that's good at cursing, it's not like they're here this morning, but they might be. You just need that person sometimes that can be real and honest and just rip it all open and say, what is going on? Job is at a point of complete devastation. He's absolutely lost, and he's crying out to God. Here's what I found about God. He is okay with my brutal honesty. He can handle it. I think we feel that we have to tiptoe around him, and everything is just good, and we only come to him in those times. But in reality, sometimes life is unbearable, and it's absolutely okay to go before God and say, I don't understand any of this. In that, though, we need to continue to understand that he is sovereign. And it says there's hope, and there is. But in this moment, Job didn't want to talk about the hope. You see, it says in chapter 4, after Job had been speaking to his friends, and he's just being raw and just absolutely spelling out how he feels. It says that Eliphaz spoke first, which means that most likely he's the oldest. The place that he comes from is a place that was known for great wisdom. Job was a man of significance, and so his 3 friends that come to him, you have to figure that there's this unbelievable caliber behind them, this dignity, this understanding of truth, these real, strong leaders that come and they sit with him in silence, and they listen to his pain, and then they begin to speak. It says, he said to Job, if someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? But who can keep from speaking? Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who have stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees. But now trouble comes to you and you are discouraged. It strikes you and you are dismayed. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? They call that honey for the pill, meaning that I'm about to give you something bitter, so let me give you something sweet first. He then says, consider now, who being innocent has ever perished? When I read passages like this that are difficult, one of the things that I do is I'll go and look up different translations and different interpretations, and then I'll go read through commentary so I can fully grasp what he was saying. If you look at the Message interpretation of this, it says this, has a truly innocent person ever ended up on a scrap heap? Has he ever ended up on a scrap heap? One of the commentaries said if you look back in history, there's 1,000 martyrs that would scream out, yes, truly innocent people have ended up in situations like these. You see, Eliphaz had this rigid theology that left him with little room for grace. Everything about their world fit in a box. You see, Old Testament theology, if good happened to you, it's because you were a good person. If bad happened to you, it's because you were a bad person. There was sin in your life. There was something that was causing this evil to happen. It didn't just happen. And if you think about the world that we live in today, too often we put our faith in a box and we make it simple. And we classify the things that are happening are results of the things that you did. Now, I do believe that the way you live matters. But I also believe that Satan is roaming the planet. And I can choose to blame God or I can choose to blame him. I would rather pursue a God that allows things to happen, but I will do everything in my power to not place him in that box. It then goes on in chapter 6. Job begins speaking again. He says, teach me and I'll be quiet. Show me where I've been wrong. How painful are honest words. But what do your arguments prove? The saying with friends like these, who needs enemies? He's in the thick of that. He's with his quote unquote friends. And he says, who needs this? It's as if he's saying, can we go back just a couple days where we were just sitting in silence, where you weren't saying anything, where you weren't giving me your advice? That's where we need to be when somebody is living through something like this. Job says, how painful are your words? Chapter 8, Bildad speaks. He's the second oldest. He says to Job, he says, how long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Can you imagine being in a moment like this and your closest friend says, well, they were sinning and they got what they deserved? The commentaries talk about his friends. They say that Eliphaz was overly religious. They say that Bildad was a legalist. And they say Zophar, who speaks in chapter 11, was harsh and heartless. In chapter 11, verse 6, Zophar says this. He says, you can be sure of this. You haven't gotten half of what you deserve. Keep in mind, a few days earlier, they traveled a massive distance to come and be with their closest friend and to sit with them and to wait with him. And how quickly that turns. Chapter 2, if you're to look at where this came from, verse 11, it simply says this: when you think about how we really do all need friends like these, this is what they do right. This is where they live and make the right choices when dealing with somebody who's struggling through sorrow and pain. And it says this, it said, when Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes. They met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. And then they sat on the ground with him. For 7 days and 7 nights, no one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. You see, the first thing that they do is that they came to him. They left everything that they had and they just came to him. They went to him and they went right into his sorrow. Years ago, Matt Stoll was one of the pastors working here, and he called me. It's about 9:30 at night. I answered the phone. I could instantly tell that something was wrong because he was just bawling. He said, "Paul, Greg's wife just died." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I said, "Tell me what's going on." He goes, "Greg's wife," it was a husband and wife in their small group. Greg's wife was driving home about 9 o'clock at night. Car ran a red light and killed her instantly. He said, "I just got the phone call. They asked me to go to their house." He was in his vehicle driving over. He said, "I don't know what to do." Greg was at home with his kids, young kids. He says, "Paul, what do I do?" I said, "You have to go. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to have anything prepared. You just need to go." In these moments of sorrow, we just need to know that when we look around, our closest friends, our family are with us. You don't need to speak. You don't need to say anything. You just need to go. And for weeks, their life group just went, and they kept going back to Greg's house, and they just went through life with them. It's not one of those things where you can go and be done with it. It's one of those seasons that is not determined by the people going to visit. It's determined by the person living through the struggle. We try to push them to get to the end of the suffering. In reality, that suffering sometimes lasts a lifetime. In September, I got a text from Blessings, who works with Live Love Malawi, who the Grove partners with and works with. Those are our guys working over there. And Blessings just simply said, "Call me." And I just knew something was wrong. I could just tell, and so I called Blessings. He said, "Richard's baby just died." Richard also works with us. He's been with us for years. His wife was 8.5 months pregnant. And he says, "I'm going to the hospital now. I don't know anything else. But their baby just passed." What do you do in those moments? I look back on the things that I didn't do with Jeremy's family. And so I just told Blessings and I said, "Go. You have to go and be with Richard. You don't need to say, just go and just be with them." Richard, a couple weeks later, put up another post and he said, "I feel like Job." He goes, "In the midst of all of this suffering, I've lost my child." And now his wife was back in the hospital with malaria. I was talking to him a couple weeks ago and he said, "We lost the baby. I almost lost my wife. I sat her in there in the hospital room. A week later, she came home. 4 days later, my wife gets malaria again, and we're back in that same room where I had just lost my baby. And I had to sit there for another week and just struggle through that pain." He goes, "But Blessings came and sat with me, and Fiki came and sat with me. And all these people came and sat with me." He said, "Some people wrote notes on Facebook, and that was nice. But in reality, I just needed people to come and be with me." It says here that after that they came, they left their homes and they went to him. It says that they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. A couple weeks ago, I was in Malawi and I was sitting with Richard and we were talking about everything that happened. And he was just being honest with the struggle. And as we're sitting there just talking about pain and how there still is hope in Christ, I get a text that simply says, "I don't know if you've heard or not, but Odinessa's wife just died." And I read it and I just went, "Oh." And Richard asked me, he said, "What happened?" I said, "Odinessa's wife just died." Now, Odiness is my Richard in Haiti. They're the exact same person, except one lives in Haiti and one lives in Malawi. Over the years, I've talked with each other separately about each other. And they became friends on Facebook. I didn't know this. And whenever I'm in one country, the other guy is saying, "Good luck with Paul. Have fun with that." And they're going back and forth. And for years, they've been friends on Facebook. And Richard just says, "I know what that pain is like. I'll send him a message." You know, as I'm sitting there struggling through Odinessa's loss. Odiness was in his early 30s. He'd been single till then. All he wanted was a wife and a kid. Finally, he got married. Within 3 months, she was pregnant. And he has a 6-month-old boy now. His wife went to visit his family up north. She got a stomach ache and died instantly. I'm convinced if either one of them would have been in the States or in a first world area, and they've gone to a hospital, because I've talked to people about this, and each person I've talked to said it's a simple fix if you're in the right place. I'm thinking, well, this isn't fair. We need to figure out how anyone that works for us in a foreign country, when anything happens, we fly them home immediately. We need to figure out how to fix all of this stuff. Odiness and Richard are both talking about how there still is hope, how God is still God, how he is still sovereign. And I realize my anger is displaced. I'm turning towards God thinking, why would you allow this to happen? And they're turning toward God and turning towards God and saying, God, thank you for still walking with us. We have so much to learn from people who live in these situations. I sent Odinex a text this week, and I said to him, hey, I'm sending you some money from the Grove. I just want you to know I'm sorry. We're still praying for you. What I'm realizing is that when you sit with somebody, you don't really need to even be with them. Odiness sent me back this text on Tuesday. He says, Paul, I'm doing okay. Dino and I were sick, but we're about to recover. I just don't know how to thank you for the words of encouragement and financial support I received from you guys at the Grove, especially from Palmer and Jeff Delp. Nothing I could do without your support. I am so proud that I have you guys as real friends. My situation is hard, but God always takes care of me and my family, and I praise him for that. In addition, you guys must be proud to have a Christian like Jeff Delp in your congregation. This guy makes great impact in my life since I met him. Jeff is a real source of inspiration. I like him. Jeff sits in the second row in the first service every week. Quiet guy. He's principal at Willis Junior High. Went on a mission trip with me a couple years ago and just came back ruined, which is exactly what I hope for every time we go. He said, Paul, how do I continue to walk with these guys? I can't just go to a place like Haiti and come home. I said, you need to figure out how to continue to sit with Johnny at the Good Neighbor Orphanage and with Odiness, and you need to figure out how to continue to go through life with them. And the interesting thing, when Odiness's life falls apart, he turns to a guy that he's barely met, and Jeff pours into his life from a distance. To me, that's how you sit with someone. You don't forget their suffering. Even if you're not even with them, you do whatever you can to walk through life with them. It then goes on to say that they sat for 7 days and 7 nights and no one said a word. They were just silent. You know the statement, there's always hope. Sure. But I don't want to hear about it right now. I don't want to talk about it in the midst of where I am. What I found with Richard and Odiness and these guys, they don't ever lose sight of that hope. There's so much wisdom in just being silent and in just going through life with those that you are close to. My wife and I were talking about all of this. And she said to me, she goes, you know, sometimes there's no conclusion. I said, what do you mean? She goes, we want to have these nice conclusions to our seasons of pain or our seasons of struggle. But oftentimes it's an entire life thing. Am I okay if my season is my whole life? Odiness will always hurt. Richard will always mourn. When I stand face to face with the suffering, face to face with the struggle, how do I deal with that? Yesterday was my daughter's birthday. One of the things that she said she wanted to do is she wanted to bless people's lives. Okay. And my wife, being my wife, figured it out, and she called people and said, who needs somebody to just be with them? And so we had 7 7th grade girls at our house. And my wife had called and she'd found out about through Jeff actually, or near Jeff where Jeff works, found a girl that had just moved into the area. She goes to Galveston Elementary. Her uniform was stolen from the laundromat, and so she'd been borrowing her brother's. The family didn't have money to give her a new one. One of her friends told her mom, and her mom called Melinda. Melinda told Yuli, do you want to bless this girl's life? And so Yuli told her friends, don't bring me gifts. But because we're Americans, they brought them anyway. But bring money because we want to go and buy some stuff for this girl. And so they went down and they bought her a soccer ball and they bought her some uniforms and they bought her fuzzy socks. And they went and they knocked on the door, left the box there and ran away. This guy comes walking out with no shirt on, covered in tats, gives you one of these. 7th grade girls and my wife in a car. Me, I'm flooring it. My wife just waves at him. Hi, Mr. Guy with lots of tattoos. Jesus loves you. He sat there and he looked and he yells at him, you're not even going to stop? And the girl comes out and looks and just her face explodes with excitement. They don't even know this girl, but they went to her. And in a sense, they sat with her. Before that, they sat around our table in our living room, in our kitchen actually, and they heard a story. My wife told them a story about a lady whose boyfriend died. He was a policeman. He died a year ago. He was hit at a stop sign. And it's the 1-year anniversary, and the lady is home now with their son. And they said, this is a time of struggle and pain. And so they decided as a group to write letters to her and to just say, and I'm listening to them talk about this, and they're just saying, if you're struggling, open this letter. If you need joy, open this letter. And I'm sitting there going, it's a bad idea. You don't even know anything about the situation. You don't know anything. Why are you doing this? You're imposing. What if this is bad? And so they just brought them down, and they dropped off the letters, and they left. My wife gets a text late last night that just simply says this: thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You, Lisa, Riley, Tatum, Lexi, Paige, Carly, Emma, Brooke, and everyone else who made me cry happy tears today. You all have not only brought a smile to my face, but to my heart. Words cannot express how much this means to me. God is good. Thank you for my flowers, my lip balm, the monkey. I don't know what the monkey was. The blanket. But most importantly, the most beautiful cards that I will ever cherish and read over and over again. Your simple kindness and generosity has brought comfort, love, and joy to me at a time when I most needed it. May God bless you and give you double for everything you did for little David and myself. You see, in the face of suffering, in the face of struggle, in the face of pain, as we're sitting in the midst of all this, we can ignore, we can walk away, we can say to ourselves, somebody else will walk through with them, or we can take it upon ourselves to go through life with them. Brian Hummel and I were talking on Friday, and he was talking about the season of life that they just went through. Their daughter had cancer this past year. And he said, for me and my daughters, I had to teach them, and we had to continually understand that it is not about the quality of life that we live. It's about the deep, rich faith in Jesus. It's about pursuing him at our complete depths, and about understanding that throughout all of this, he is still there. He is still present. He still is the God that gives hope. My prayer today is that if you leave here, if you're struggling, if you're dealing with life, I pray that you have people to go through that with you. I also pray that all of us come to a point where we can listen and recognize when God is nudging us to go and speak love into people's lives. As a last resort, we use words. We're called to go. We're called to sit. We're called to listen. When we look back on those seasons of pain, we hold on to those people that surround us. And like I said, with music, as it reaches in and grabs a hold of your soul, so does sorrow sometimes. It's those moments where I can't understand it, I can't comprehend it, I don't know how to explain it, but I have to know that God is still God throughout all of this. My wife and I, for years, have been dealing with struggle, not between us. You've been a parent. And if I'm honest, the best moments are when we have people that are with us, just encouraging. I encourage you as you leave to listen to God's voice, his nudging, to be aware of his presence.